The Bank of Japan has been frustrating many market players of late, giving away virtually nothing on if, or rather when, they will implement real stimulus measures. That said, over the weekend we saw quarterly GDP data showing growth in Japan, but not necessarily as everyone had predicted. Now we've all had a chance to take a good look at the data, it's time for us to gauge a reaction from today's guest, Mike Hamilton, who founded TradeTheEasyWay.com, a company that trains traders and professionals alike and whose clients hail from North America, Europe and across Asia. Thanks for joining us, Mike. Tell us a little bit more about this release, because despite a fourth consecutive quarterly expansion for Japan, it wasn't quite as great as some analysts expected, was it?
No, it certainly wasn't. I mean, it's certainly seen, we've still got consumer spending growth, but it's slowed. Bear in mind that the consumer spending is 50% of the Japanese GDP, and that's having a major impact. We've still got this cloud of deflation hanging over Japan, and with the tax incentives on purchasing fuel-efficient cars potentially coming to an end, maybe even this month, that is suggesting that we've seen a superficial increase in consumer spending over recent months, which is drawing to a close.
Now, you mentioned a car scheme just then. Some analysts think private consumption could take a hit once the government's eco-car subsidy runs out. Do you think this will make any difference to consumer attitudes there?
I think it will. I think we've seen, if you look at the level of consumer confidence and consumer indicators in Japan, it is tailing off a little, just slowly tailing off, and we're still under that magic 50. All the time we're under that magic 50. It holds a cloud over the Japanese economy, and I think we've had raised inventories in China, which has slackened demand off from Japanese goods. So there's a combination of European and Asian effects that have come together to sort of suppress this current figure and causing great concerns.
Now, private consumption and exports are arguably the main drivers behind this data. Private consumption, although looking resilient, only grew 0.1% quarter on quarter in Q2, while a weaker demand for exports have caused a few problems as well.
Yeah, I mean, stepping back from Japan for one moment, I think my overriding feeling of this, I've been listening to all the central banks very, very carefully over recent months, and of course Bank of Japan. And I think all central banks are keeping their powder dry in preparation for a potentially rocky autumn. I mean, the markets, particularly the Dow, is heading for major resistance areas, which, flipping back to the sort of issues we've got in Europe, and then that has direct impact on Japan. I think what we're looking at here is a situation where the central banks are all sitting on the sidelines. The Fed have been very quiet in recent months about their thoughts about progressing with any further easing. Bank of England has not been quite so quiet. They have come forward and said they are prepared to relook at that, and with a view to doing further injection in the autumn. I think all the central banks, including Bank of Japan, are getting ready to take action, with the potential for Spain to ask for a bailout, which I think we're heading for despite recent press. And I think that will be the trigger for Bank of Japan to come in and act with the other central banks and try and prop this up and revisit yet again this issue of deflation in the economy.
Finally, let's take a quick look at a couple of currency pairs. In light of the GDP data and possible future easing from the Bank of Japan, what are your thoughts on, say, the dollar yen and the pound yen?
I think the point of reference for this dollar yen, going back as far as 94, 95, is this 80 mark, and the US dollar yen cannot get above this 80 mark, despite that sort of sprint up to 84, and it just died off straight back below this key 80 level. I think we're certainly struggling. The odd pound yen, this is where I do think there is scope for some growth here. I'm a pound bull. I think this pound is severely undervalued with a few of the pairs, and the pound yen is no exception. Over the last couple of years, we've not seen any breach below 152, and here we are coming out for 157. So, although there is, until we can close above 157 on the monthly chart, I wouldn't expect anything dramatic. But I certainly think as we get into the autumn that there is a potential for that pound yen to break up.
And finally, what sort of direction do you see Japan and the BOE going from now on?
I think the Bank of Japan will be doing a lot of soul searching and already doing a lot of prep for intervention. And I think all central banks are acutely aware of what could happen in the autumn. The Fed would definitely want to see the economy propped up as we head into the US election. So in terms of Bank of Japan, I would expect to see some action sometime soon, possibly end of August, possibly early September.
Well, thanks for joining us, Mike. Mike Hamilton there, talking to us about Japan and the recent Q2 data. That's all for now from me. Don't forget to keep checking back for your latest updates on what's going on in the markets here. Until next time, though, goodbye.